I'm going to tell you the story of Stephen, and then I'm going to kind of unpack it, is what I'm going to do. So Stephen is this guy that the disciples need some help. They need some help with food service and things like that because they're helping out a lot of people. And they end up casting lots, basically. They find 7 guys, cast lots, and which is, whenever you see in the Bible casting lots, you can summarize that as throwing dice. All right? So they were throwing dice down and all that stuff. And they kind of land on Stephen. And Stephen ends up being like this really great servant. In fact, it says in Acts chapter 6, verse 8, Stephen's full of grace and power and was doing great wonders and signs amongst the people. Like, this Stephen's great. Like, he's doing all of these amazing things, but people really don't like Stephen very much. It kind of goes back to what we were talking about last week about, the threatening power and all of that. And the people that are in power over the temple, they start to be threatened by Stephen, and they start to instigate the crowds against him. In fact, it says this about him, and they set up false witnesses who said, "This man never ceases to speak words against the holy place, against the temple, and against the law. For we have heard him say that he is with that Jesus of Nazareth." You remember that guy, that Jesus of Nazareth, who said he wanted to destroy the temple and 3 days rebuild it? He will change the customs that Moses delivered to us. So they're instigating fear amongst the people, right? Like, they're going over there, it's like, we cannot stand this because Stephen's coming in. He says he's going to destroy this beautiful temple that we built. I mean, look how beautiful this temple is, right? He wants to destroy this temple, and he wants to change all the things and all the customs that Moses gave to us, right? So they do that, and Stephen ends up giving this really big sermon and basically takes all the things of the faith that they love, right, and kind of uses it against them, and says that no, God has always been a God that is on the move, that is doing the new thing. That it's not about just sitting here by the temple. God is always kind of on the move and doing a new thing, and we'll get into more of that here in a second. But they get super angry at Stephen. And they drive him outside. They pick up stones and they stone him till he dies. And just before he dies, he says that he sees heaven being opened up, and he sees heaven being opened up, and he can see Jesus standing at the right hand of God, and that he's standing at the right hand of God, and then he says, "Yeah, Father, give me my spirit." And he says a couple other things which we'll get into in a little bit, and he dies. And the interesting thing also is that Paul, his name is Saul at this time, he's actually kind of overseeing this death and persecution of Stephen. So that's Stephen in a nutshell, right? That's kind of the story of it. It's real cheery today, right? Like, that's super cheery story. But it's important because we begin seeing an important thing that's going on here. Because I want to go back to what we said here. They're connecting Stephen to Jesus, saying, "Hey, this Jesus of Nazareth, he said he wanted to destroy the temple. That's what Stephen wants to do, and he wants to change everything that you know and love." Right? He wants to change everything about the law in Moses. Like, he wants to change your faith and all those things, right? Like, they're upset at him, and they're trying to get everyone upset around him. They're holding their traditions and their works and their buildings up super high, and they're refusing to move the newness of the things that God is doing today. Right? So, this book isn't that old, but I want to talk about it for a second. Have you guys ever heard of the book Where the Red Fern Grows? Many of you, like that book, so I'm looking at the other millennials in the room that may have read that in 6th grade or something like that. I don't know if that happened. The rest of you, it came out in the 70s, so I don't know if you actually read that. Are you guys familiar with this book? It's about hunting dogs and raccoons, basically, and that's what it's about. It's kind of become kind of an American classic. Although I was talking to Coley about it last night, and she goes, "I didn't like that book at all. It was boring." Right? But she did admit that, she goes, "I'm really not into hunting stories." So like that's kind of what it's about. But one of the things that kind of stuck out of my mind about it was that this in this book, this boy is hunting with his dog and his grandpa, and they're going raccoon hunting. And one of the things the grandfather says is like, let's make a raccoon trap. And the trap that he makes, and I've heard this in multiple instances in other examples, but a raccoon trap, he basically takes like a hollowed out like little thing like a pipe, puts nails kind of down it, and he'll put something in there that a raccoon would want, like a shiny object or something like that. And have you ever seen like a raccoon hand? I call it a hand because it's super creepy because it looks like a hand, like on the small animal and stuff like that. Like that's the raccoon hands. And he said that the raccoon will reach in there and he can put his hand in there and then he'll grab whatever is in there and he won't be able to get out. And the boy asked his grandpa, he's like, well, why won't he just let go of it? If he could just let go of it and flee and go back to safety, then why does he let go? Because that thing is too precious to him to let go. And he'll just trap himself in that. I've heard the same thing about all manner of animals that kind of have like kind of hands like that where you can go in and they won't release the thing that's over there. And I think we ask ourselves, like, why won't you just let go of that? Go to safety. Let go and go to safety. Like that's, I think it's one of the things Stephen is saying. Like, why don't they let go of Egypt after God has taken them out of Egypt? Why won't they let go of that? Why do they build a golden calf built out of their own hands? Why won't they let go of that? I think we kind of wonder that, but we do the same things. Like that's kind of a universal thought, that there's stuff that we love that we refuse to let go. Right? Like we refuse to let go. And we see that all these people are so upset at Stephen because they're worried that they're like, he's going to change all of our customs. He's going to change everything about us. Right? Like what's funny is whenever anyone complains about change and someone coming in and changing all their customs, that has no analog to today, right? We're all really cool when someone comes in and wants to change some things, right? No one's laughing, really, because they know it's true. They're like, oh man. Like, it's like, what he's talking about. Like, think about what they're saying. Like, he's coming in to destroy the temple and to change all of our stuff. And they're holding on to the temple so much, which ends up becoming an image of them holding on to a rock so tightly that they're just, and the only way they're going to release that rock is when they're hurling it at the thing that they want to end. Right? Like that's it, and when you point out those things, ooh man, when you come up to someone, it's like it's like when you have to confront somebody about something that they're doing, it never really goes well. It's never to the point where someone's like, oh, I see that I had this improper behavior about this thing, and I will now make corrections. That's never how it goes, right? No, they're always like, what? Grab a stone and get ready to throw, because they're holding on to that previous thing, right? They're holding on to it. And that's what I want to ask for ourselves today. What are you not letting go of? What are you not letting go of? Is it what traditions that when they get threatened, you begin to hold on more tightly and you begin to grab that rock and get ready to throw it. Right? What things are around you? What do you hold dear that you are like, I need to hold on to that? Let's do the easy one in the room. What political cause do you have that you are completely willing to destroy someone else over it? Right? How dare you speak ill of my thing? I'm going to have to blast you in the comments on Facebook or something like that. We'll do all of that, Like we have so many things that we do this on, right? Like it's, how dare you do anything that is against mine? And it becomes, when people confront us on those things, we don't let go. We hold them tighter and tighter and tighter. And we're like that raccoon in the trap that we can see dangers coming, but this in here, this thing is actually holding me in bondage right now, is too much for me to get out of it. And then becoming holding tighter, tighter on the stone, getting ready to throw it. This is what Stephen is calling out here. And he uses all these stories in the Old Testament to talk about this. He's using all these stories where he talks about Abraham and Joseph. You know, he says in Abraham, like, you'll be this amazing nation and all that. And he goes into Joseph. You remember Joseph, right? Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat, right? Remember him? And so he's walking around in that Technicolor Dreamcoat. Now, what was weird about Joseph? He was the favorite of Jacob. But where was he in the pecking order? He was last. So, if you were the oldest, and it wasn't like your second brother or your third, but it was the 10th one born, was the favorite of your father's. How do you think you'd feel about that? He's getting all the cool, like, when you came up, you had to buy your own car, right? And all of a sudden, your father Jacob buys your 10th one in line. He buys him a BMW or a Tesla. We'll say that, right? We gotta be cool. It's like he does that. Like what? Like how dare he do that? That's what that coat was, right? And so they're holding on to the system that they have so much that they're like, we've got to kill him. Sound familiar? And they throw him into a pit, right? And they want to kill him, but they end up seeing some slave merchants coming by, and they sell him into slavery. And in that time, we see that what they intended for evil, God intended for good. And God uses that system, and he ends up making Joseph to be the king, well, not the king, the prince of Egypt over all the grain. And there's a great famine in the land. And when Jacob and his family ends up needing food, they're able to come to Egypt, and Joseph basically saves them, right? And I kind of mentioned it already before, but he then moves into Moses' time. And Moses was this great prince in Egypt too. He was this great prince of Egypt, but he was actually Hebrew, but no one knew that at the time. He did something kind of bad, got kicked out of the Egyptians, and then Stephen says, hey, when Moses went back to God's people, saying, hey, God will free you from this slavery, Stephen says they didn't listen to him. I got this new way that you can go. But he didn't listen to him. They're like, we prefer this old thing. And when God finally pulls them out of Egypt and they build that golden calf, they're still pining after the old way. They still are holding on. They're not letting go at all. They want all those things. And then, are you guys ready for this? We're about to read what Stephen says to them. He's been telling them all these stories that they love, all these stories about their history, these stories about who they are, these stories about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, about Moses and Aaron, about all these things. And he's setting up and he's saying that you guys are saying that I want to destroy the temple. That he's saying God has been going against the established ways the entire time and has been doing a new thing, and he's been saving through that new thing. And he looks at them and he says this, you stiff-necked people, uncircumcised in hearts and ears, you always resist the Holy Spirit just as your fathers did. And then he says this. So he's telling these people who they want to kill him. And he's been using their stories against them. And he's like, you stiff-necked people. And then he says this. Are you ready? Which of the prophets did your fathers not persecute? Think about what he's saying there. Which of your granddads didn't kill anybody? Didn't actually hurt somebody? Which of them did not actually hurt one of the prophets? You know those prophets you love to read and say that you are listening to everything they say? Which one of them did you not actually persecute? And they killed those who announced beforehand the coming of the righteous one, who is Jesus, whom you've now betrayed and murdered. Like he says, you persecuted the prophets, they announced Jesus in, and you killed Jesus. And you guys, who've received the law that has come before you. Now, how did they react to this? With cool heads? They're like, I never thought about it like that, Stephen. You're right. Like what's God doing in all this stuff? Like, no, they grab rocks. They grab rocks and they take him outside the city and they begin to pummel him with stones. Like, how dare you use our stories against us? How dare you take away the very things that we love, the very things that we have done, right? And the only way that they would ever loosen their grip on that is when they loosen the grip to throw the stone at something that they have hurt. And think about this image. It's a violent image. We listened to it on the Dramatized Bible during Sunday school today, and it was a little rough. I was like, ooh. I was like, oh man. And think about all those stones being flying at Stephen. And I think there's two things going on here. I think there's couple things going on here. I think our natural reaction, our reaction when people start messing with the things in the past, those idols that we have, we begin to pick up stones and we refuse to let them go, right? We refuse to let them go, and we're going to throw at this other thing and destroy it, right? And we're going to go there. And I'm going to be honest with you. I've thrown a few stones in my day. When somebody said something against me, and like, my mind can be quick sometimes. It's got to be perfect time during the day where I'm not too sleepy, I'm not, like all that stuff. Like at perfect time of the day, I can be kind of quick. And someone will say something against something that I love or do, and I'll pick up that stone and I'll be wham, and hit them. I imagine we've all done something like that, right? I have another thing I want to say too. I've received more stones from people inside the church than I've ever received outside. I've had people say the nastiest, vilest, hatefulest things to me, and I commune with them on Sunday, or I give them communion. Right? I've had people that say nasty things and they never show up to church again, which is basically like throwing a stone, killing me, and hoping they never see it again, right? We've never done that in this room, have we? Like and I'm saying I'm part of this too, but there's another part too, because we all know that we've lobbed stones, but there's another side of this. We all know that there are times when we've had stones lobbed at us. Listen, there is persecution out there. There are times when people are going to throw stones at you. There are times when people are going to hurt you and try to maim and stop what you are doing because you're trying to bring freedom into all of this. You're trying to bring freedom of the gospel to these people, and they're going to resist that because your freedom is stopping their power, right? And they're going to throw stones at you, and that's what I want you to see happens with Stephen. Because all these stones are being thrown at him. And all of a sudden he looks up and the heavens are opened up around him. And he goes, I see Jesus standing on God's right hand. I see Jesus standing up there. And then he says this. And when I read this last week, I had to sit down when I read it. And as the stones are pulling him, he cries out with a loud voice, Lord, do not hold this against them. Listen, sometimes when we're holding on to the things that we love, when we're holding on to those things that we love, we get angry and we want to stone the person that's talking against them, right? We want to do that. But sometimes when the stones are being thrown and lobbed at us, we become so self-indignant in our own self-righteousness that we're like, that's right. Because imagine what Stephen would be saying here. I think if we look at it in our own self-righteousness and self-indignance, right? Like, imagine what Stephen could be saying here. He's like, oh, guys, I see that I'm right. I can see Jesus. He's right there. I know that I'm correct. I know that I'm good. Like, yeah, keep throwing those stones because I know that there's going to be a big chasm. I'm going to be in the nice warm bosom of Abraham, and I'm going to look over you burning in hell on the other side of the chasm. I hear it's hot down there. You better bring a fan and a glass of water, right? Like we don't think that, but Stephen lets go of his own self-righteousness and goes, Father, forgive them. And who is he quoting when he says that? Someone else famous on a very tough circumstance. Jesus on the cross. Sounds a lot like it, right? He looks at that and he gets, look, Stephen had every right in the world to be, I know I'm the right way. I'll see you guys burning in the HE double hockey sticks, right? And he goes the way of Jesus, where he drops his self-righteousness and goes, Lord, just forgive them. Because that's what Jesus did for us. And I think because we have been forgiven now, because we have been shown that forgiven, our path now is, if it goes down the same way as Stephen, is to let go of our own self-righteousness, to let go of that and go, Father, forgive them. Father, forgive them. So you are all forgiven. So God always is using the prophets to save his stiff-necked people. And as Stephen is being stoned, he takes the form of those prophets and he picks up the cross and he points to the accusers and says, Father, don't hold this against them. May you always know that God saves you as you point to their enemies and say, Father, forgive them.